Hello, everyone. It's another Sunday night, and that means, of course, it is time for another episode of Explain Yourself. We have a great book to talk about. It's a cyberpunk book, so I'm excited about that. It's got some great artwork, so I'm, also equally excited to talk about that. And we have the book's creator and writer, Nigel Lynch, joining us today. Nigel, how's it going?
Pretty good. Thank you for having me on.
Nice. I have a little bit of a freezing screen here, and hope you're on here.
Yeah, can you hear
yeah,
me?
there we go. All right. Yeah, no,
Yeah,
my screen froze up. That was probably on my end. Sorry about that. Well,
no
Nigel, welcome
problem.
to the show, and thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
So, tell us the quick elevator pitch for Neon Ghost.
Okay, so the quick elevator pitch is Neon Ghost is a story about two sisters who were separated, and they their journey began, and they went into the big city, and they were separated, and through different hardships, they're trying to unite back to each other. One sister becomes an assassin, and the
Mm-hmm.
story follows her journey where she searches for her sister, and it's about the bond of the two sisters and them thinking about each other and not forgetting who they are and that kind of thing.
Sounds good. That's a great kind of emotional core where you can
Hmm.
keep all this cool adventure stuff in there, all the cyberpunk atmosphere, and the I'm sure exciting action-packed scenes of assassin stuff. But you're always just kind of following the story of, gosh, I want them to find their way back to one another. So very cool stuff. So your campaign's been it's got 16 days to go. It's met its goal. It's doing really well. Has 74 backers. Hopefully you can get a few more. But it's really, like I said in our intro, a great looking book, which I love to see. And that's always great. And I'm also a big cyberpunk fan, as I know a lot of other people are. Tell us a little bit. Oh, actually, we should start. I should mention, if you're watching this on YouTube or on Facebook, the link for the Kickstarter should be right down below with a few other books. So you can just head over right down there, one click, and you're on the campaign and you can back. Tell us, how many is this part of issue one of an ongoing story? How many pages is it? Like, what is kind of just being offered in this campaign?
Okay, so this is a standalone book. So what I've tended to do as an indie creator, I like to write a series of one shots. So
Mhm.
it's all set in the same world, and the stories are linked together. So they do have a continual thread going through them. So you will see characters pop up from one book to the next, and you will be able to see their growth of the growth of the characters from one story to the other. Or you may find like this book is a prequel to another book. So what this book does is answer certain questions that you may have thought of. So where did this character come from, or what's her backstory, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
And the idea is to do something because as an indie creator, one of the things that is a difficulty is production. And we don't have the luxury of being able to pump out books on a regular basis. Some of us, in terms of like, let's say every month or even every 3 months. So the book is 50 story pages so that I can give you a full story. So when you read it, you can walk away contented knowing that it's a beginning, middle, end. There's a lot of content in it. You can, I try to write the books where you have multiple read throughs. So you read it the first time, then you go back at it again, you see something else you may have missed. And because all the stories are connected, there are Easter eggs dropped from one book to the next. So it's a lot of discovery. This book is 50 story pages, but the book is about 74 pages long. And what I kind of did was add a behind the scenes section at the back of the book. And this is a breakdown of my thought process, some words from the artists, words from the colorists, um, even some of the fans, some of the
Mhm.
reviews I've had over the years. It breaks down pages from, you get to see a page from sketch concept to colors. And that's something
Mhm.
that sometimes people don't get to see the process of what goes into making a book. And I just wanted to kind of do something special for the fans and for the Kickstarter, especially because I wanted the Kickstarter book to be special. I wanted that when you back this book, you got something that when it goes out, let's say it sells on the website, we may not do the back page special because of cost. It's already a big book. We may just pump out the 50 pages. But if you back the Kickstarter, you have something that's special.
Yeah, I think that's something definitely that that we can offer. I mean, the disadvantage is, like you mentioned, we can't really get a book out every month or even every 3 months because it's just so hard to do as an indie creator, logistically, financially, all that stuff. But I think something that's kind of a counterpart to that, you work with those disadvantages, but it also gives rise to other great things. One thing you mentioned is, this is 50 pages of story. You're giving everybody a complete beginning, middle, and end. That's a little more than I think 2 issues would be if you were talking about a big 2 book, which are generally, I think, 22 to 20 pages now. The nice thing is a lot of, obviously a lot of the creators that are doing this and writers I talk to, they kind of are wanting, these books are being made for the passion of it, but they also kind of want to show it around, and hopefully an editor sees it, they might get another opportunity. And generally the thing there is you need to leave it all in the field. You need to have a beginning, middle, and end. So I think there's something that just by happenstance, because of that set of circumstances, as Kickstarter creators, we are offering stories with a beginning, middle, and end that you don't necessarily get from Marvel and DC anymore. Even when you had longer ongoing arcs, they're still, back in the 80s, every comic was somebody's first. You had to introduce things. You had to give a good resolution for that chapter of the story in a way that since the early 2000s, I don't think we really have anymore. So I think that's something that as Kickstarter creators, we kind of are forced to do, but it's a good thing. And I think it's a unique thing backers can get from us that they don't necessarily get from other places. And the back matter is a good example of that. I do a ton of that as well. I always have a million sketches and other things to show off. And it's great to have that to share with backers. So you mentioned something else about your stories, about how you structure them, that this is a prequel kind of to another story. And some of the characters turn up in further stories. Some of them don't. And that's a cool thing. I think that's kind of what novelists do. In fact, I think in Neuromancer, it's sort of a semi-sequel to Johnny Mnemonic. They mention him. Some of the characters are there further on in their journey, but there's really no reason not to do things that way. And I think that's kind of a fun way to approach things, where you are getting kind of a linked universe, but you're also keeping yourself the constraint that, hey, this is going to be a complete story. Are you kind of painting I assume you're painting like a larger canvas with some of these characters that maybe the story is not necessarily building towards an all-out conclusion of some kind, but do you kind of plan on keeping this going on and on in this world and having some of the characters evolve and bounce off each other?
Yes. That's my plan. It was always a plan initially, and what happened was the nature of the way how indie work goes sometimes is you plan for something may happen, and then you have to kind of pivot. And what had happened was I originally wrote a series, or planned to write a series called The Diary of the Stray Dogs, and this was a cyberpunk book with mercenaries. I have a love for mercenaries in pop culture, movies, documentaries, that kind of thing. And I also have a love for science fiction, that kind of semi-dystopian future, things like Elysium. Like I grew up with watching things like Total Recall, that kind of stuff. And I wanted to kind of build a world that was something like that and have that cyberpunk feel. So I wrote the first book, which introduced a lot of these characters, and it got kind of stuck in development hell. So then I kind of was working on another book in the same series, and I said, well, I don't want to kind of cross lines too much. So it caused me then to change the timeline a bit and set them years apart. And that was a part of the world, and that kind of got stuck in development hell. And then the third book I did, Third Time's a Charm, I met a artist called Juan Carlos Francisco from Spain, and we kind of did a side story with one of the smaller characters saying, well, we'll do this character, and this character probably wouldn't mess up too much with the greater timeline and the books. And that was the one book that was finished. And from there, it kind of starts to build out the story using that character's storyline, which I kind of, as you start to work with a character, sometimes you start to get a love for that character. So although she was initially a side character, she became a main character. And I wrote The Diary of Stray Dogs, The Wounded, Part 1, and then I wrote The Wounded, Part 2, which was a continuation of her struggles as a captain in a mercenary group. With their hub base was in the Caribbean. It's set in the year 2135, around that kind of time. I wanted to set it far enough in the future so that I could have some freedom to create, but not too far where there's no limitation to what we can do. Mm-hmm. So that's something because we all kind of have a different style of science fiction that we like. We don't all tend to, want the same thing. We don't all want lasers, or we don't all want, say, transporters, that kind of thing. So with that set and the world set, I start to build out the universe, things like the religion, the factions, the countries, and I kind of drop little breadcrumbs in the background of the story. So with The Wounded 2, this character here, Gaz, was introduced, and she was one of the more standout characters in the book. So a lot of fans kind of asked me, who is she? Where's she from? I'd like to see more of her. And it made me kind of say, well, I have the backstory of all of these characters in my head. Why not go ahead and do a prequel? So that's how Neon Ghost was formulated, and that's how it came about. The name Neon Ghost was the last thing to come. One of the things that I have either bad luck or I find difficult is actually naming books. Sometimes I have a great book, but it's the name, because you can write a great comic book, but if your name of the book isn't catchy or memorable, it can kind of fall into the sea of all the different indies. There's so many times I go onto Kickstarters, and if I don't save the page or save or follow it, I can't remember in 2 weeks to even search for it. Sometimes that happens. So you have to have a catchy name that that you can. So I came up with the name Neon Ghost, and that's how it came. That's how it kind of came about. So again, it's a building out of the exact same world, and I had started to establish that crossing over because of the starting all the time. The only thing that's kind of happened was some of the older books are no longer canon because I've changed so much about the characters and different things like that. But it's all for the better, because as you produce things, you become a better writer or a better artist. So sometimes that's just the nature of it. So certain things will be, certain things will not be published that never was finished, because the newer books are better and they've changed the canon of the story.
Yeah, I have my Scarlet Twilight's my main series. It was kind of the one that caught on a little more, but the series I really love working on is called August, and it's a science fiction kind of space opera, Cowboy Bebop sort of thing in the future. And it was in my head forever, development hell of like a decade, kind of like what you're describing. And the story was changing and expanding and contracting in different ways, getting split off into different chapters. And I ended up condensing it when I found a publisher, lost a few things, most of which I'm pretty happy about in terms of pacing. But there's one character I wish I could go back and keep in the main story, because I got so many good ideas from later on. But it's kind of the problem when you're just like living with this stuff all the time, and you think about it all the time, that it's like, oh yeah, no, that guy's perfect here, and this is plays off this really well. And it's tough to just like separate that into this little chunk that's a fun story, and works and everything. About the name Neon Ghost, I'm kind of surprised. It's a great name, and really to speak to what you were saying about, it has to be a good name. It really does. Just as much as it has to be a good costume, which I think her look is really iconic. You've got I think almost a superhero-y kind of distribution of like design elements on her with the goggles, the color of that, the purple cloak. That's really a good costume if it were a superhero, and is iconic as the name. I'm actually surprised Neon Ghost wasn't taken because it's such an excellent name.
There are some names that are very, very close, and as you said, that's the issue that you do get. Sometimes you come up with a name and you Google it, and it's taken already, and it's up to you to either stick with it and say, "Well, it is what it is," because there are a lot of things in entertainment that has the same name. There are two movies called Bad Company. Uh, that's the one that comes off my head. There are tons of stuff that has the same name, and sometimes within 2 years apart. Even the name, the Diary of the Stray Dogs, I came up with that about, I'd say, 15 years ago.
Oh wow!
And yeah, so I came up with that. I love the name Diary of the Stray Dogs. Then later, for another indie book to come out called Stray Dogs. So it was like, what do? Do you then change your name, or do you just keep it? Will you be, will you be such of will it cause an issue? So it was like, sometimes we overthink these things, and if it's, you don't know what's going to happen. And if the call comes and it will be an issue and it may stop you from getting a publishing deal or something, you can pivot and change your name again,
Yeah, it's hard. You really fall in love with stuff sometimes. My initial name for August was Frost. So I thought, oh, he's kind of like a prickly character. I thought that was so clever. And I found an image book that was named Frost. I was mad for like a day. And I'm like, actually, that name sucked. I'm really glad I had to think of a new one. This was horrible. But usually you're like, oh, I was just in love with it being this way. And then you take a day or two and you're like, it could be something else. It's fine. And that's something I think you could do when you have a good backbone. You've got this great looking character. It's iconic. You've got a good world. Speaking of the world a little bit more, that's a great cover. I saw that before. I almost made the thumbnail, but the type was up there. So where is this city located in the world that the story takes place in?
Okay, so it's a fictional Asian Eastern city called Neo Shinjuku. With my books, I kind of put them all in fictional locations, like a fictional Europe, fictional Africa, fictional Caribbean, but with enough elements of reality so that it feels grounded, but with the enough of the original name or meshing of settings so that I can have a little bit more freedom. Sometimes with some of my creators, we kind of go back and forth on that, where some people like to go, let's make it a real city. Let's base it off of New York, or let's call it London or whatever. And then some people say, well, let's not do that, because what if we do something and then people get offended or whatever. And for me, sometimes it's just like, why not? Let's just stretch our creative muscle and just do something totally new, something totally fresh, because this is the point of comic books and being creative. You can do anything you want, especially with comics. There's no budget that limits the creativity. Like I said, the story on the moon. Like I say, I could say the story on Mars. So there's certain things like, I don't say it, but it kind of implied that it's also like an alternate history. That way too, I can kind of play with certain events. Things may not be invented at the same time, or different people may have invented certain things, stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things. It's even more like fun to do, I think, in comics, because you can set it in different places. I just love and I know that like Cyberpunk 2077 has a little of this, but you have all these scenes on these boats and stuff, which almost could be present day. And I think that's a good evolution. I really I've never played that video game. I've watched some cutscenes. I don't have a PlayStation or whatever it's on, but I draw comics. So I don't have time to play video games. But the one of the things I love about that game is that it kind of gave a little bit of a nudge to the cyberpunk design. It had a lot more like graffiti, it had a lot more color. It had a little bit of a western, kind of like deserty feel
Yeah,
to it. It wasn't just this sort of ersatz Neo Tokyo or like Los Angeles with a few more lights and stuff. And I think did you see that Ghost in the Shell they did in 2017? The live action one is pretty
yeah.
mediocre.
Well, so I like it. I kind of get what it's not the best. It's not the best,
Yeah.
but because I'm such a so for me, right? I'm a science fiction fan. So let's say you were to rate a movie out of 10. Any science fiction movie kind of starts high and then comes down for me. So
Yeah.
there was a lot of elements that I kind of enjoyed about it, especially in the original movie and seeing them translate it into live action. So like there's a scene with the garbage truck and the shootout. I kind
Yeah.
of like how that looks, and then stuff. There's certain parts of the changing some of the elements because that's the problem. Sometimes the original stories they worked, and when you meddle with them, it kind of throws them off.
Mhm.
But in terms of the essence and the feeling of the film, it felt perfect. The technology was great, the that kind of stuff. So I wouldn't argue if someone said, well, hey, I don't like it. But there's a lot I kind of so for instance, I kind of take different pieces or I absorb a lot of stuff when I watch these things. Things like the expanse. There's a underrated science fiction movie called Upgrade. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
Okay. I've seen part of it. Yeah, it got
Yeah.
great reviews. It looked like a fun Netflixy sci-fi movie.
Yeah.
Very
And
much in the
that
vein of like
so
Elysium a little bit, kind of a little
yeah,
dialed down.
yeah. And it's kind of almost like a Black Mirror kind of thing where yeah. And that's for us
Mhm.
again. So when I did one of the books, so there was a scene in there that I kind of really enjoyed, um, where these people were in a abandoned building, and these these people were addicted to VR. So when you
Mhm.
go into this room, there are a ton of these like homeless people hooked up to VR sets, and you're just walking through them, and they're just either whatever they're doing, they're mimicking it in reality. And I just kind of just love that where you kind of mix the tech with this really dirty, grimy scene, something like what we would equate to something like a drug house, but it was a
Mhm.
VR thing, and I kind of incorporated that into one of my books. But it was an arcade, something that we don't have many of now. But I kind of did a futuristic version of an arcade. What if you had an arcade where everyone was playing a massive VR first person shooter, but everyone's in there. So when you go in, you just kind of seeing these people just walking around and shooting and playing, and they're just wrapped up in it for hours. So
Mhm.
I kind of like to take different things. As I said, like how some people like horror, and they will give. There's certain horror movies that, to me, they're schlocky or they're not that good, but people who love horror rave about
Yeah.
them, and that's it for me with science fiction. There's certain things that I kind of like. Yeah, I get where you say them, but I just kind of like it. I like that. It's my jam kind of thing.
No, I'm totally with that. Science fiction. It's the same thing with me in sci-fi. The reason I was calling it a little mediocre is it was almost. I think it was 2017 or 2015 they made that, and it was almost
Mhm.
like the genesis or the hypothesis of like the everything up till then cyberpunk design as far as like the cities go. And they did do a great job with the scene where the guy by
Mhm.
the garbage truck's fighting, just because that was so impactful in the anime. You had to like have all those colorful signs in there. It had to be that good. But when you had the sort of those little short film interludes they did, which they kind of did replicate pretty well between scenes where it was just city shots, it was all just very gray. It was very there wasn't like it wasn't interesting in the same way the anime was because I think it was a little fresher. And I what I was
Yeah.
kind of saying about Cyberpunk 2077 is I feel like there's new elements finding their way into cyberpunk visuals that I like that kind of put in there. It
Yes.
needed a little bit of a transfusion. But I totally agree. There are some I can watch a bad science fiction movie and be like, there was some stuff in there I loved. It was totally worth my time. But if that were like a
Yeah.
comedy or a horror movie of similar quality, I'd just be like, forget this, dude. I can't take it. It's not for me.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. There's another one I kind of watched the other day too. That the new Blade Runner movie. That
Hmm.
was, and there were certain set pieces in that, certain things I just kind of really like the concepts of it.
Hmm.
That kind of just like wow. Something about doing future, and as you said, where it looks as though it could be set today. When you do a science fiction and you say, well, set 2 years, 200 years into the future, sometimes we think everything has to be ridiculously different.
Hmm.
So you then say, well, it's got to be, and that's something that used to happen in the 80s where people speculated what the future would look like. So then you'd watch an 80s movie about the future and everything in it is kind of bizarre. Like, make cars
Hmm.
very boxy and there was all these different things.
Yeah,
But the
we
truth,
never have boxy cars now with the Cybertruck running around.
yeah,
Unimaginable. Never
that's
happened.
yeah, yeah. But that's something. So that's one of the things that kind of came true. If you look at there's a car that looks a bit like the Cybertruck in Total Recall, um,
Hmm.
but one of the things that the elements that I kind of think about is that no matter how far we go in the future, there's still always old technology.
Hmm.
So you have you can always mix. So you don't have to go into like a totally out there setting. Like everything doesn't have to be hyper uh, futuristic. I tell people one of the most popular guns in video games is AK-47 and 1911, and these are guns that are almost 100 years old. So, and they still reference in our pop culture. There's still reference in our video games, that kind of thing. We have certain cars that even though just become classics. So there's certain things
Hmm.
that will always be around, and it helps kind of tell the history too in the story. So you then kind of see where things, oh, so this is what they have. And so in my story, I have cars with wheels and I also have flying cars because not everyone's going to
Hmm.
transfer or translate over to whatever it is that's there. So it's a bit, it can be difficult, but if you overthink it, but I just think you just kind of have fun with
Yeah, I think it's hard, especially with what you're doing, which is our world a little bit removed. I was mentioning how I got lost in my science fiction series, but it's so far in the future that it's kind of just Star Wars ish,
it.
milieu. You don't really have to worry too much about do they still use like radios in cars. They just kind of have what they have. Whereas I think it's very easy to get lost in cyberpunk. Like, okay, what stuff would it be fun to include from present day or even the past that maybe has been used in other stuff in a different way, or that there's just some value and some interest in finding like an old time radio in something or whatever bit of present day or past day
Yeah,
technology or
yeah,
way of doing things that you can give a different spin to. It'd be really easy to get lost in that, but also when you nail it, when it's done well, it's really fun, especially if you can kind of get a different take on it. I think the Blade Runner, the one they did a few years ago, the 2049 was I didn't obviously it was never going to be as good as the
mm,
original, but it did have its own like real dignity to itself in terms of like a evolving that world and b doing things that were interesting and fun but made sense. And I thought that was kind of cool. And they were. I mean, I think that was kind of something where when I heard they were going to do it, I was like, my first thought is just like, don't. But secondly, they had, if you've ever watched the special features for that, they talked to the two writers that were primarily responsible for writing it, who were in different tracks. Like one had a little more of an artsy script, and one was kind of bringing it back down to earth. But there was enough stuff they described there that the first guy did that was never used that was cool. And actually, that was the first scene where Agent J or K, I forget what his name is, Ryan
mm,
Gosling's character goes in and fights Batista. That was in the original. That was the opening of the original version of Blade Runner. And I thought there were a bunch of scenes like that, and then everything in Android Do Android's Dream was also not a ton of that was used. So I thought, yeah, there could be enough there to make a good movie. And they kind of used some of both of those things, but it wasn't great, and I don't think it really had a great shot at being great, but it did bring in a lot of stuff that you could see our world evolving into, and it had the texture, I think, of like our real world, but mixed with Blade Runner. And it would have been so easy for them to just redo Blade Runner
Yeah.
in the same exact way. I like that they evolved the world a little bit. And is that something you're kind of looking to do with this comic? Because you mentioned that you're kind of taking this at different, just because the way you went about it, you're kind of tuning into these characters at different points in their lives. Is that something you're kind of taking advantage of and showing like, okay, at this point something happens in the world, and now here's how they all react to it and how they're changed by it?
Yes. So what I would do is I would, for instance, there's a religion that's in the story, and I introduced it into one book. I have one character who worships this lost astronaut, and as the different stories evolve, you kind of start to see different aspects of the religion. So
Mm-hmm.
similarly to what you were just talking about, where with technologies changing and stuff, in the story, the people kind of build shrines to old technology. So
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of like when you go into that junk drawer and you pull out an old Nokia phone, or you find an old Motorola, and you find this old camera kind of thing. So the idea is kind of like, without these stepping stones of technology, you wouldn't have what we have today. So they have these little shrines in their homes, almost kind of like a ode to technology. And it's in one
Mm-hmm.
panel in one book. Then later on, there's a statue of this character. Then you kind of, so with the hope that someday I will do a book about that character, or a story centered around that religion, you know, where it's more prominent. Uh, there's a book I did called Critical Ops Task Force. It's a side story. But what I did first, I keep peppering posters in the main story, keep referencing the characters or the organization, so to build up, so that when I then introduce that comic book, you kind of, you're like, oh, these are these guys, or this is what this is about. And it's a fun thing to do. So as you said, different uh different things will reference. So something in the past will have an effect. So then you may realize this character was killed off, but then I do a flashback, and then you realize, because of the timeline, the character that you saw die appears because they weren't dead then. So then you kind of see what they did in their past, and what, how they weaved into the story. And I get a lot of that stuff from or like things that something a series that did that well was like Grand Theft Auto. Grand Theft
Mm-hmm.
Auto kind of, it's the different sets kind of joined together, but they're not done in a like chronological order. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
there's like this kind of little bit of weaving and stuff. So I like that kind of stuff. I love when something is connected. I was I was a child of the 80s, and I used to get a kick out of watching a TV show and then seeing an actor from the other TV show playing the character that he was in,
Mm-hmm.
like, and you're just like, oh my god, I can't believe it. It made the whole world just feel more real for that, for that brief uh, cameo, or that brief
Mm-hmm.
crossover episode and that kind of stuff. So I kind of like a lot of that stuff. So I try to implement it to my stories from series to series, or from because they're all set in different times. It gives me a lot of freedom to just kind of just have fun with it.
Yeah, I think that's something that, again, it's something that you have to do things differently on Kickstarter. You have to do things differently as an indie creator with limited resources and time. But there's good things that come out of it. What you're describing, I think, is something that has a lot of value for a reader, and I like it. I like jumping around in timelines just because, like you said, you see a character that dies in this story, but they're not dead yet. You see them in a later story you're reading, but chronologically said earlier, you mean that just all rushes back to you. Suddenly have a lot of feelings about that, and that's a really cool thing to just. I think it's just a cool tool to use. You've got, like, you can just kind of pull some strings there, and when you're doing a chronological comic that's going to have to start issue one and end at 400 or something like that. You're not going to have that opportunity in the same way. And I think that that's something that people who are doing really cool stuff in the indie space are like looking for little opportunities like that. Oh, wait a second, I'm doing things this way, so here's a cool thing I can do because of that I wouldn't be doing if I was doing a 30, 50 issue Neon Ghost large story all in order. You have to jump around, but then you think, wait, there's cool stuff about that. Let me take a quick break here and share some messages from some of our partners, but we'll come back, talk probably more about the story in Cyberpunk, because I love talking about it, and also a little bit about the marketing of this and how you're getting it out to people.
Okay, no problem.
Click that mouse and warp into All Ages of Geek's website, your ultimate portal to everything geek culture. Here you'll find articles that speak your language, from the latest anime buzz to the coolest tech trends. Our mission? To celebrate geekdom in all its glory. Whether you're a gamer, a comic enthusiast, a 90s kid, or an anime aficionado, we've got something for you. Dive deep into them with All Ages of Geek.
Your comics take a lot of time and effort to create. Way too much to have them get damaged while shipping to your backers. Gemini Comic Supply mailers keep your comics safe in transit, and with the code GeekCollective10, you can get those mailers with 10% off your order. That's GeekCollective10. Enter it at checkout to get 10% off. And I should mention, I just had to make an order for Fulfilling Scarlet Twilight. It needed about 200 more bags and boards and Gemini mailers, and saved a bunch of money using that code. So if you're fulfilling on your own, like I'm doing for the first time, it's definitely a good move. Okay, but enough of that. Back to Neon Ghost. We're up here at the top, kind of showing how well you're doing with this campaign and how many people are back, how many days we have left to go. You mentioned you've done a few other books before. How many Kickstarter campaigns have you done with this series before?
Okay, this is my second campaign. I did the first one like last year, and that was a learning experience. Kind of getting to understand the psychology of crowdfunding platform, trying to wrap my head around promotion, marketing, what is too little, what is too much, what is the correct time to start to do it. Some people say you should be marketing all the time, but there's a downside to every strategy and there's an advantage to everyone. You kind of got to do what clicks for you or what works for you sometimes. So I learned a lot from the first campaign, and I kind of took what lessons I learned and put into this one, and this one has been a lot more successful so far.
Yeah, I think that's something that's really important, is to just look at what works with other people. And I think that's getting, in some ways, a little easier, in some ways harder. And that when my wife has been after me to do a Kickstarter and Indiegogo for years, and I was like, no, I got this publisher, I want to do that. And I wish I had listened, and she was absolutely right. I should have started earlier. But I kind of came in and started researching it around 2019, 2020, and noticing what was going on, some of the books that were being made and how cool they looked. And it was a little more Wild West in terms of what was being made and what was really catching on and being successful. And then now I think the good and bad thing. The bad thing is maybe things have been a little bit more locked into certain genres, and there's just less variation. But the good thing about that is you really can see what works in a concrete way. I think that's kind of important to do, and it's tough to balance that too, because if you're not making something that you really love, that you believe in, that you're excited and passionate about, there's really no point in doing it into comics. At the same time, if you're completely unaware of like trends, it's going to be, you're running really uphill. So it's a tough thing to balance. And I think that I look at this and I'm like, I definitely see you, kind of look at what is doing well, but also like, it's not like you're like, oh, I saw this, and this doing well, and I just kind of threw them together and put it out there, which is, I think people need to do. I also noticed you got the Project We Love Kickstarter badge. I've never gotten that. I'm pretty jealous.
Yeah, this is my first. That's my first.
Did anything happen, or did it just pop up one
day? When we was in development, where we was writing out the page and that kind of stuff, and as you said, we put a lot of work into the page. Um, for instance, I got a trailer done. Uh, I went with all the things in terms of trying to get the catchier images,
Mhm.
descriptions, all of that stuff. And when we submitted it, it just got a project we love. So I was I was I was taken aback, and I was very surprised. This is my first one, and I'm kind of seeing the benefits of it. Um, there is some benefit to having that sticker on your project. I think it helps with people believing that what you're doing is authentic, or you're not out to scam. There's a lot of comic book Kickstarters. I could say, well, look, this is just purely a scam. You got a guy asking for $10,000. There's no art on the art page. Uh, the pitch makes no sense in terms of the timeline, production, or whatever. And you're saying, like, how did this kind of how is this on the platform? You get things like you kind of get, as you said, there's certain trends, certain books that you look at and you say, well, this is gonna blow up, but there are 100 of them that are like that. So then you as you said, you kind of do what you want to do. You're not in it to kind of make a copycat book to be successful. You are trying to make your book successful. So the only thing you can kind of look at is things that. So what I would try to do is look at other books, similar genres, see what they did, see campaigns. I would study campaigns that were successful, and I would say, well, okay, this has a video, this has this amount of tiers, it has this kind of price point, it tells you this kind of information, and little things in a campaign, small things, it makes a difference between backing it and not backing a campaign. For me, one of the things I like to know in a campaign is how many pages it's a comic book, so that I could kind of wrap my head around the costs versus page count, that kind of thing. Which package should I buy? That kind of stuff. Those things you kind of want to know. And sometimes you will find a campaign will not give you that information. Luckily, some uh, creators you could just reach out and talk to, because the community is very close knit and people are very open. But that's the kind of thing. So in my campaigns, I try to make sure I give out as much information so that you kind of know what you're getting. I try to talk about the artists, talk about the everybody that was on the team. Don't make it about myself, because the comic book is a team effort. Everybody who kind of helped try to put them into the forefront, into the limelight. In terms of tiers, try not to do too many tiers, because you don't want to give someone too many options, because that sometimes is as bad as too little. And
Yeah.
I try to approach it mathematically. Uh, Ask for the least amount that I can be able to, if I do get it, that can fulfill the pledges. So you kind of, do some maths there, so that once you reach this amount, you know for sure you can fulfill the pledge. Because I've seen Kickstarters where they reached the amount, but it was too low, so then they couldn't fulfill.
Mhm.
You know, you know, I've seen Kickstarters where they were too high. They asked for too much. The book is a great book, but it's their first time, and they asked for too much, and they didn't quite make it. But if they had asked for a little less, they could have, and they would have still, they would have been successful, and they would have gotten the books out. So it's an intricate dance that you have to kind of do. There's a lot of psychology involved. Different people have different ways of looking at it. Like, for instance, my wife always says, how come if you met the goal, people still back? And she can't wrap her head around that. And I was like, it's because you're producing something that hopefully the people want. Because there are backers who back so that you will finish. So you have a friend and you say, I have a Kickstarter, and so how much do you need? And say, well, I need to get over this hump, and they'll put some money in. But there are other people, when you've met your goal, they're like, okay, you're good because they're looking at it as helping you, but they don't want the product. So what you're trying to get or hoping that your fan base is full of is people who want the product and want to support you versus people who just try to get you over that initial hump.
Yeah, that's what you said a lot of things that really resonated with me. So when I was starting this out, I think it was early 2021 or 20, yeah, that I launched. And it was, I made my goals as low as I could. I set it up in a way that I could scale it. If 3 people back, I could fulfill it. If 500 people back, I could fulfill it. And made sure I did it that way, just, and obviously for my own peace of mind, but also for, you got to, just be open to like what you're gonna find out there in terms of people interested in your story or as you in a creator as a creator. Whereas, you really have to look at this stuff like a backer, which is what I think you said a few times. I don't want to have too many tiers. It's like, if there's more than, a certain amount, I just get like, all right, this is a lot to keep track of, and I have to remember the difference between the one here and the one that was like 3 things up, and that's just kind of tough mentally to do. And that's, I think, something I've tried to keep in mind as well. Like, all right, I'll make this very easy to keep track of, to back, to want to be a part of. And that's something I think we have to be like super customer facing as we're trying to, like you said, get people that want the actual product, that want to follow along with the story. And I always want to make that like as easy as I possibly can to do that. And it's tough to think about, to kind of step out of yourself as a creator and say, oh yeah, I love this. I want people to read it. I think it's cool. It's something I wanted to exist, but sharing that with other people, it's really tough to kind of convey that message. And I think your campaign does that really well. It's a really nice page. Has all tons of great artwork. The tiers are simple, and yeah, I'm really glad to see it's doing well. You mentioned your team, and I usually talk about how things work for the artist more. Tell us a little bit I mean, I guess specifically with design. Did your artist kind of run with that and kind of create the world that he wanted to see, or did you guys really go back and forth on like design element? I mean, sure, some of the characters are already established, but like as far as just creating the world, how did you guys kind of go back and forth there?
Okay, so we have to go back to the first book. Me and the artist for this book worked on Juan Carlos Francisco from Spain, and we started with as I was telling you, all the other projects I kind of did were they were in hiatus. They were kind of, and I was in that mode where I just wanted to create. I was really excited, and the whole indies thing hadn't like beaten me to death as yet, and I just wanted to create. And I went on a site called Upwork, and Upwork is a platform where you can hire artists, writers, whoever, and the because one of the things in this, even though the community is it's a great community to kind of work with, and you can hire people and you can do stuff. There is this kind of intrepidation in terms of like, can I really trust this person? Can I send? How do I know when I pay you for pages, you're going to do the pages and you're not going to run off? How do you know when you deliver me the pages to me, I'm not going to just not pay you? So Upwork kind of is that go between. You put money in escrow, and both parties kind of agree that the work was done and they're happy with it, and the money's funds are released and so forth. So I went onto Upwork and I was looking for an artist. I had the script was done, and you tend to just kind of put out like an ad, and people would then kind of say, "Hey, check out my work." But I saw his work, and I just kind of loved his interpretation of the cyberpunk world that he had. He kind of had a few pieces and stuff, and then I also saw some comic book work he did, and I could tell that the storytelling, even though it didn't have any words, it was really good storytelling in just the artwork alone. So I reached out to him and said, "Well, I'm doing a comic. Would you be interested on like putting your name in the hat to be a part of it, or would you like to bid? Or we just started to talk about it. And he said, yes, he'd be very interested. So I sent him the script, and he liked it. And I said, well, do a test page for me. And he said, okay, we just discussed business. If we do the test page and it, like it would be a part of the book, etc. We did the test page. I loved it. He did some of the characters. And he just had that style that was a very European, something like out of a heavy metal kind of magazine, kind of book, kind of style. And I just kind of liked it because it's not a superhero comic book, so it doesn't need to have that kind of muscly hero in tight shirts kind of thing. It has to need more grounded. You need characters that have a little bit more character. You need people that, if the person's a junkie, to look like a junkie. If they're a tech head, to look like a tech head, etc. So he came up with a lot of the design because, as I said, I kind of liked his cyberpunk world just from some of the pieces he did. So I just kind of felt comfortable knowing that whatever he did, I'd be happy with. So I wrote the script, sent him back and forth with pages, the usual feeling out. But one of the things that we kind of did was, before we started the book, we created a Google Drive, and we both kind of put images in there, references. We discussed movies. We sent clips. We talked the same movie Upgrade. I kind of clipped out scenes from the actual movie and said, I like this. So we were on the same page tone wise. He sent me a few YouTube links to some short films, stuff like that. So it meant that we kind of knew what each other kind of liked. So when he sketched something, it was like, okay, yeah. Or if I came up with a character, he would then say, well, I think this is a bit too bland. Can I spice it up a bit? Can I do a little bit more? For instance, one of the books that we did, there was a hacker. And I just had it as, let's do a hacker. But he said, well, I have an idea. Can we do the hacker as a goth vampire? So he's like a person into that kind of vampire scene. And by doing that, we ended up turning the place where he was into a vampire nightclub, a vampire themed nightclub with tattoo artists and stuff. So the world just kind of built itself based on just us exchanging ideas. So I like to say, well, a lot of the stuff in this book and in this world is him. A lot of it comes from him. It's the descriptions from the script, but he took it another step. And because we worked together so well, sometimes I would look at a page and I would go to tell you, well, you see this page here? In my mind, I think that I wrote so much describing like graffiti on the wall or whatever. But then when I go and look at the script, I realize that I just kind of said a dark alley or whatever. But because we were so in tune and we built the world, he took it that next level. So a lot of this is a true amalgamation of both of our ideas together.
Well, I think that's something that really paid off for you. I mean, as an artist, I really appreciate hearing that you were like, yeah, I'm going to, I mean, you're basically being respectful of each other and each other's time and what you put into this. And, you both have to have a lot of passion for this to be created and for it to be good. And I think it takes a lot. It's not always that intuitive for a lot of people to create an environment where that can happen. It sounds like you took a lot of pains to make sure, hey, do you like want to do this? Is it going to be fun for you? And then also look at ways you could incorporate his ideas in a cool way. As an artist, you have to spend so much time sitting there looking at some page, just chipping away at it. It takes forever. So it's got to be fun. And I think that for you to kind of make space for that to happen for him is A, just obviously a good thing to do, and B, gets you some really great results. And just makes the comic that much better for everybody to back in the end. and I think the results speak for themselves. So we're getting pretty far along in time, so I guess I should wrap it up. Like I said before, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can just scroll right down. The link to this book on Kickstarter is in the description. You click right over and back this book, and I hope you will, because it's awesome. And I think not only is it a cool looking book, just for what you get here, it sounds like you have a ton of stuff planned for this world, and I think we'd all like to see more of it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. So let me just show off a few more books here that we want to highlight. The first one is a Kickstarter project that is based on our magazine archetype. Here Galvez and co-host put this together. It's a hardcore piece into the artwork really archetype. And he has just an awesome job on this design and on this film. So basically what you get is how the best it is you get a half a card, you have a stamp, you get one outfit, you get one card, you get one of another card, it's an artwork, and it's never done. So you watch the stuff like that. But this is 5 years ago, and I think it's really fun. Really a lot of things. It's really fun and follow. That's cool. So hopefully the kids will get back to being a kid, buying their best cards or Marvel cards, cards, and doing that. Obviously, there's also enough good extras in this magazine itself. The magazine, as I mentioned, is a Love Letters to Wizards magazine that kind of uses the four modern day Wizards comics. You've got the 2 years comics in there, you've got the artwork, you've got the assistant writers, you've got the process, everything about what they're doing to bring these stories. So kind of just stuff is a great feature, issues, and you can of course continue stuff with the time. Uh, yeah, this is not this story. And let's do it at home, but like I said, this is all this really good stuff, really fun. And it's 5 years ago. I hope you will check it out. Next one is C.J. Hudson's Hunters of the Outer Realm. It's rogue planners running afoul of an alien life form unlike anything they've encountered, upending the very space and time around them. This one is, in my mind, just so cool looking. I love the artwork. It's it's something that works in comic books, but also is just different than what you normally see. There's a lot of great artwork styles out there. Sometimes when I see something really off base in terms of visuals, I think like that's cool artwork, but as a comic book, I'm just kind of like, it doesn't quite get there for me. This I think is the perfect balance of that. I got a lot of new
Yeah, I
stuff.
relate this.
Yeah, it's really good.
I really, I like, as I said, I like something that the art style is a little different. That it took a chance with the art style, and it comes off to be rather refreshing. And
Mhm. Yeah, I think there's a lot of value in that. When we get down to some of these other pages that are just really cool looking. I mean, I'm like, yeah, I kind of feel like 90s video games a little bit here when I see this stuff, but not totally, not in a way that's really derivative. Um, but it's something that's new, it's interesting, and it just totally works as a comic book as well. So I think this is a great campaign, great looking book, and I hope people will check it out. I just love to see stuff like this being created. So um, definitely head over to Kickstarter. The link to this one also is right down there in the description, so you can check that out. The next one I want to bring that up. Do this real quick. So this is not in my tabs. Got closed out. There we go. Remember part 2. So this one has got 21 days to go. It's a really intense crime story. It's got kind of a true detective flavor to it. I would say I would. It's kind of hard to describe in that it's pretty cinematic, but it also has a lot of just punchy, pulpy elements to it. I just got done with the cover for this, which I think turned out really well, and was excited to share with everybody. So I hope everybody will check this one out. It's a really good story. This is the second issue of it. It's kind of got some crime stuff in it, but it's kind of approached from a very personal angle. So it's got your sort of like crime unfolding elements, but it's also got some very gritty personal stuff that happens in it. It's very intense, and I think that's a cool thing to see. In addition to my artwork, there's some really great other stuff you can get here. Some beautiful covers, and this one I think has just turned out really cool. So this one, like I said, remember part 2 has 21 days to go. It's just about to its goal, so I hope people will head over there and check that out. I think that's the last of the other ones I have to share. The next one I'll share is my story, Cobalt Crisis. This one should be launching next month. It's basically a combination of Secret Wars or Crisis on Infinite Earths, but as if it had been created in the 1940s when comics were just starting out. So it's a sequel to We Are Scarlet Twilight. I wasn't sure I wanted to do a sequel to this one. I really liked how issues 1 through 4 unfolded and ended, but left it open in case I had a good idea. And about a year later, I did. I was reading Crisis, and I thought, hey, this could be really cool. There's a lot of good things in Crisis that are pretty unique to those types of big 2 crossover events. And it would be really neat to see those in a 1940s style, in the same way that kind of was mixing and matching with the original We Are Scarlet Twilight. I was just reading an interview with Marv Wolfman, who wrote Crisis, saying he didn't even think Crisis would be that remembered. It was sort of he thought, well, it would be just some route we took to get the stories that people would then remember. But it turned out Crisis was the thing people kept coming back to. That really resonated with me, and it kind of made me think about like what stuff happens in those stories that's cool, because there are a lot of common things. And I thought to see that happen in a golden age pulpy style would be really fun and worth doing going back to this world, revisiting these characters and continuing the story. So you can head over to the link in the description and follow this. We should be launching in about a month, I think. I want to make sure I have the issue pretty much done to share with people, so you can get it same day if you back and message me. But I just finished up the variant cover for this one. The main cover you can see here, at least part of it. And just couldn't be more excited about this. And I hope everyone will follow along, because I'm really pumped to get this story going. I think that will do it for today. Nigel,
Word looks great, man.
Thank you for coming in Neon Ghost with us, man. I love talking about this genre, and I especially love talking with you because you just, you have to think about this stuff as much as you do, I think, to make a good story. And it's clear you live and breathe this stuff just like I do. So it's really fun to talk to you about this. I hope everybody that is into this stuff and watch will head over there and back this comic, because I think it's a cool, engrossing world to be a part of.
Thank you, man. Thank you.
All right. Well, I think that does it for us this week. I hope everybody has enjoyed checking out this comic as much as I have. And come back next Sunday. We will have another comic to show off. And until then, have a great week.